What's up guys? Episode 2, Trainer's Tips, eccentric exercise today. So what is it to start? Eccentric exercise, or an eccentric muscle contraction, is the lengthening portion of the contraction. So the muscle is still under tension, but it's lengthening out. So in that context of the bicep curl, we've got our concentric, isometric, and then eccentric. So sometimes it's referred to as the negative portion of the lift. It is resisting the pull of gravity, so almost acting as brakes. So that's your eccentric muscle contraction. When we talk about eccentric training, typically it's focusing, whether it's putting more attention on it or slowing the tempo. So for example, if we're doing that bicep curl again, I'm typically thinking about slowing that tempo, maybe for a 3 count or a 5 count. So we're gonna dive in deep again today. We'll start with all the reasons why it's good, why we would use it, and then some specific tips. So watch along, thanks. So why would we use eccentric exercise? So reason number 1, similar to isometrics, is it's been shown many times to produce greater connective tissue health results than standard exercise. So by focusing on the negative portion of the movement, we're putting added stress on those connective tissues, your ligaments, your tendons, and that in turn is producing a better result, giving you more robust, healthier, stronger tendons, which in turn is going to reduce your risk of injury. So that's number 1. So reason number 2 could be looked at positively and negatively, is the eccentric portion of that muscle contraction is going to cause the most muscle damage. So on the positive end of things, that in turn, as long as we're recovering properly, is going to produce better hypertrophy. Again, there have been a couple studies looking at different ways to build muscle. Oftentimes, an eccentric focused training regimen can produce better hypertrophy results. However, with the added damage, you are going to be more sore after. So if we're looking in terms of in-season training, we're probably not going to want to go heavy eccentric exercise. So a third reason why we'd use eccentric exercises, we can overload that muscle contraction more so than we can a concentric movement. So if we think in that context of the bicep curl like I've been doing, the max amount we could curl up would be reduced or less than the max amount we could control down. So in some strength context, if you look at power lifters, guys who are really pushing the limits on what they can load that muscle with, they can do either partner aided eccentrics or like somewhere where you're rocking the weight up and then focusing on that eccentric down with more weight than we could do for that concentric. The last kind of 2 reasons why we would use eccentrics, just like the isometric, I find it's a really good teaching point. So in this context, we'd probably want to use less weight. However, we could really focus on how we want to do the movement. So let's look at a squat. If I was in that position and I told my client to really take 5 seconds down, they would become much more body aware and understand what kind of muscles are working and really having to focus on that full pattern. Lastly, I think if we're focusing on eccentric, sometimes we can actually subconsciously get more range of motion. So if you think about that bicep curl again, if we're kind of hammering out reps, we might not get to that fully extended position. So with an eccentric, we're likely loading that tissue in its full range of motion, more so than a standard kind of 1-1-1 tempo. So going over some examples that we just talked about, this is the overload principle. So if I'm doing a preacher curl and I want to overload that bicep, what we could do is we could grab a heavier weight than what we could do concentrically. So I'm going to get to that position and I'm going to really focus on that slow eccentric. So to get down to full extension, and instead of curling up, I could then use my other hand to kind of bring it up and again perform that rep. These are great with partners. So if we have a partner there to help us on the way up, if we're doing whatever movement it may be, it can really provide that overload stimulus on that muscle that you're trying to get without that risk of really pushing that heavy concentric out. So give that one a try. Really dive into how I would typically perform an eccentric exercise. I'm gonna show you guys a squat. At the beginning I talked about how if we're doing sub-maximal loads, it's a great way to teach a movement. We're getting that connective tissue benefit as well as getting that mind-muscle connection and that body awareness for a new athlete or something early in a training phase. But the tempo I typically like to use would be between 4 to 6 seconds. I think more than that can be extremely demanding. Less than that, we're kind of still moving through that movement quickly. With your athletes, either try to have a partner count for them or make them count out loud, or you count for them, because oftentimes if they're just counting in their head, they'll go way faster than the time. So I'll give you a squat eccentric. Let's go for 5 seconds here. So you can squat in whatever way you want. I'm just showing it in that goblet form. So I would take 5 seconds down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Get to that bottom and drive it out. And again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Drive it out. Rep counts for eccentric, I would typically drop. So I probably don't want to do too many more than about 8 reps for eccentric. If we're going longer than that, it becomes very much an aerobic workout just because our tempo is slower, and if we're doing lots of reps, we've got a ton of time under tension, and that's just going to make the movement a little more challenging. But if you're looking for those strength gains, again, I would look probably as low as 1 or 2 reps to the high of 8 reps. So that's how I would typically perform it. Again, there's unlimited variables, but that's a great way to add that into your workout. So really brief recap, eccentric muscle contraction, that's the lengthening of that muscle under tension. It's the brakes of the movement, we're resisting gravity. Eccentric training would be looking at how we control that tempo. So setting a predetermined amount of seconds that we're gonna do in that eccentric, and that will be included in the training. So benefits, we've talked about connective tissue health. There's the hypertrophy benefits, the fact that we can overload that eccentric more so than a concentric, and then that mind-muscle connection, that body awareness, good for teaching athletes. So I hope you guys enjoyed this again. Lots of tips there. We're going to continue this series with a new topic next week. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.